Good morning, church.
Good morning, church.
So before we begin, this is the third week of us sort of following the book of James and Coach James. So before we start, we want to continue the exercise that Pastor started us on last week. So let us review the coaching assignments from last week. Do we have that on the slide? Okay. Oh, okay. So what were we asked to do? Anybody remember? And anybody remember that one? Anybody want to stand up and do it? Yeah, let's all stand up. Anybody who remembers it want to come up and join me? Okay. So, Jesus, orient myself to you. Do it again. Jesus, I orient myself to you. Okay, thank you. Okay, so 2 minutes, okay? Just pair up, just share about what you've done this week in terms of what the pastor has asked us to do. What you've done in terms of like practicing your lesson from last week. Okay, time's up. Okay, so please continue your conversations during fellowship hour, and do consider sharing this in your other conversation with other members as well. Okay, so again, if you haven't signed up, you want to let the pastor know. Email her, or you can even just put a note, or you can write a little note on a slip of paper and put it into the offering plate, and it'll be sent to her. Okay. So, anybody want to share about what they done this past week? Have everybody tried doing the body prayer? How did it feel? What what about the actions from the last week? Anybody? What discipling action that you guys, we sort of like picked some goals last week and we were going to try to do them daily this week. Anybody? How everybody do? Any comments? How was the experience? I picked some of the actions out of the nonviolent communication book and tried to like read it. I forgot to do the body thing too. I think Wednesday to catch up I did it 3 times. So, but it was good. I mean, it feels a little bit strange to do it first, but after a while, it actually was sort of neat. Sort of, I was at work, I got out of my chair, nobody's looking. Sat back down, nobody noticed. We're in a cubicle, have pretty wide walls, and I'm short, so. Okay, well anyway, before we continue again, let's take a deep breath and let's join me in a short prayer. Lord, we thank you for this wonderful morning. Through each other, we feel your warmth and your support. We thank you for the coaching of St. James. May your word, Jesus, speak to us each day as we continue to learn from St. James, so that day by day, our bodies, our spirit, indeed our souls, hear you more and more clearly. Amen. So I got the invite from Pastor Emily to speak this week, which is quite a few weeks back. She gave me a lot of advance warning. A lot of random thoughts went through my mind, not the least of which was my father named himself James when we came to the United States back in the late 50s. So let me tell you a little bit about the James that I know. So like most immigrants, we were not a well-to-do family. On outings, we took the bus. Back then, AC buses goes to San Francisco. So we did on a number of occasions. On one that I remember pretty clearly, we were going to San Francisco. My dad, I was about 11 or 12 at the time. My dad was probably in his 50s. So my mom, my younger brother, and me, so we got on the bus, and it was a weekend, so on weekend, you didn't have the express bus going to San Francisco directly, so it kind of meanders around Oakland before it gets onto the freeway and go over to San Francisco. So it was kind of crowded when we got on. We had to split up and sit in different rows. And then, as it meanders, the bus was pretty full, and from what I remember anyway, this is quite a few years back, it was full, and so there was no more seats. I don't know where some people standing in the back or not. But it was still kind of going through Oakland, and I think, obviously it goes through West Oakland before it goes on the big ridge, right? And so I was going through West Oakland, a pregnant black lady came on. And of course, there's no more seats at that point. And to my surprise, before anybody else, my dad stood up and gave his seat to the lady. And then he stood on the rest of the way to San Francisco. Well, I don't remember a lot of what my dad told me, but some of these instances I remember pretty clearly. So I guess the bottom line is action is communication. When we do something, it does stand out, and maybe we may ourselves may not remember, but somebody else might remember what they saw us do. Which is what I think the letter of James is all about. Thanks, Katie, for reading the scriptures this morning. So this week was just continuing to listen to St. James, right? So we're reading this short book in the Bible. Okay, another digression. Everybody knows that in the Bible, these letters or these chapters are just written, right? So the chapter numbers and the verse numbers weren't on there when they were written, right? So now when we read the Bible, we kind of like focus on specific verses and so forth. But I kind of wanted this morning to sort of like take this as more of a holistic perspective, looking at the whole of St. James as a whole. I think a lot of us, Jane, for example, was saying that, since Pastor's asked us, a lot of us have been reading the whole book, over and over again. Another digression. So anyway, we started in Sunday school this morning. I forgot to come up during the announcements. A survey on the New Testament, and Pastor Moon is actually going to be teaching it. Pastor Emily gave me some slides to kind of give everybody a taste of it this morning, and she herself will lead the class next week. And then, of course, we'll have our church picnic after that, and then Pastor Moon will be teaching the class. So I think it's going to be a really good class. Those of us who sort of participated this morning thought it was a fun class, and there were some lofty goals that would be good for everybody to participate. So I want to, again, invite you guys to come to Sunday school. Okay, so for the first week, we look at the whole book of James, right? He really just talked about actions. What are some of the things he said? Anybody have, if you have the Bible, go ahead and flip to James. And kind of like go with me. I'm going to do like a quick jumping around. And actually, this is really the good reason why people, like 1,000 years later, put chapters and verses in a book, right? Because I don't think I could make this a really short speech, which is already kind of long already, and explain where I am without kind of referring to chapters and verses. But that's not how James wrote the book of James, right? So he wrote it as a letter. He wrote from beginning to end. So if you remember from it, or you could just take a quick look, in the beginning, he sort of like started out giving sort of a pep talk, and sort of like saying after saying the usual salutations, consider yourselves fortunate when challenges come your way. Then he starts to provide some perspectives. For example, in verses 19, everyone must be quick to listen, but slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Then he repeatedly goes on, I think in a number of verses following that. I don't know if you have it in your version. I have the Good News Bible version. And he just says practice, practice, practice. There's at least 3 usage of that word in the next few verses. So you could kind of like see why Pastor Emily kind of like used the analogy of coaching for this series. Then James kind of goes on to, in what is now called chapter 2, sort of like God's view of the big picture. Like, we really shouldn't be prejudiced. Whatever, really, whenever we break one commandment, we, really just kind of break them all. So if you look at verses 18, 21, 22, 24, 26, and so on, it's like action, 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 right? So it's really kind of like calling us to practice, 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 action, 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 right? So then we come to the middle of James this week, which is sort of like what we now call chapter 3, verses 1 to 12. So James has been saying practice, 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 because we want to orient ourselves to God by our actions, right? We don't orient ourselves to God by faith alone. Kind of like, well, you want to keep on reading the scriptures, you want to keep on, studying, you're really not going to really acquire faith. I think that's where he's coming from. So in order to acquire a working faith, we really need to practice, practice, practice by action, action, action. So to me, when it comes to chapter 3, he's really talking to those who are still not convinced, right? So he's really kind of saying, oh, well, some of us think of ourselves as leaders, right? Well, what do leaders do? They talk all the time, right? They just talk. Okay, so he goes on and says, so so their excuse or leaders' excuses, oh, our practice is talking. You know, we're really, you know, leading by talking, right? But maybe, so he kind of says that, well, maybe leaders need to adhere to higher standards. Talking could be like a, you know, biting, or could direct, like a horse's rein, or be like a rudder in a ship, but it could also burn things up, right? So he kind of starts and talks more about how dangerous talking can be. So if we were to kind of take this whole together, and I think that Pastor Emily and Bert may continue this theme the next couple of weeks, then really, it's if you think you're really wise and understanding, then prove it. Prove it by doing good deeds, performing with humility and wisdom. What's doing good deeds? Well, it's really, you know, action, right? And what's performing with humility and wisdom is, and that's sort of like, you know, oh, we're practicing. Okay. So personally, I don't think that James intended to talk about self-control here. But if we think about it, practice orients ourselves to God, and taking actions that reflect our faith, wouldn't we then not have really much of a self-control issue to begin with? If we orient ourselves to God, and we practice, we really have a self-control issue. Okay, so having said that, James is quite eloquent in calling out the importance in controlling what we say. The bit in the horse's mouth, the rudder, the fire analogies are really, really, you know, even 2,000 years later after he wrote this, is really very eloquent and really be good writing. The question then is what we do about it. And I have to confess that I'm probably in need of help in this area as much as anyone. You're not sticking my foot in my mouth. So, don't want to sound like bragging, but it seems like I've been asking myself what to do for years, and really, there's a lot of, you know, obviously self-help books and so forth. Right? But I really have to give credit to Pastor Emily, who introduced us 2 summers ago to nonviolent communication. And for those of you guys who haven't seen it, it's you know, these two books. So I think quite a lot. Veronica's here. She even got the Chinese version. Really, it's quite a remarkable book. It gives us steps to do some of these things, right? So when we get inspired by St. James to kind of, okay, we need to control our tongue. What do we do? And really, I think a lot of that is in these books. So all we could do is really just work at it, take it, you know, a step at a time. NVC tells us that, you know, we need to observe, listen without judgment. I think we went through a verse in St. James that kind of says that. Recognizing our feelings, discern our needs, request instead of demanding. So in some way, this is sort of a framework that helps me break down a conversation or exchange to understand better the dynamics of relationships and how I deal with other people. Now, I wish I could tell you that this book has transformed me and how compassionate I've become since studying it, but I have a long way to go. But these books gives me a structure, and really good modern psychological reasoning, and ways to take actions and practice. So, can you click to the next slide? Okay. So here's some of the points that comes out of these books, and those of you who come to Sunday school sort of, you know, probably recognize some of this. But this is some of the meditation you could do. These are small baby steps that we could do. We want self-control. Just spend some time each day reflecting on how we like to relate to ourselves and others. remembering that everybody have the same needs, and really ask ourselves, discern our intention to see whether we are as interested in others getting their needs met as our own. And then when asking someone to do something, check first to see whether we're making a request or a demand. A request is an asking and willing to accept a no. And then another one that I thought was pretty relevant is that when we're being upset, think about what needs of ours is not being met, what we could do to meet it, instead of thinking what's wrong with others or ourselves. So all these really just comes out of these books. And I found them particularly helpful. The last one actually kind of sounds a lot like a response to James 1, verses 2 and 3. In my version, it says, "Consider yourselves fortunate when all kinds of trials come your way, for you know that when your faith succeeds in facing such trials, the result is the ability to endure." Think of how nice it would be if somebody pushes your button and you don't react anymore. Okay, so with actions and practice in mind, will you join me in this week's exercise assignment? Is there a next screen? Is there a next slide? Oh, no, not yet. Go back. Okay, so just to continue the exercise for next week, and Pastor wants to continue this rhythm during worship, is to just do it daily. I think certainly would be good to continue the body prayer. And if you want to identify a way to practice self-control relating to your discipleship goal, or just continue the goal that you already picked for yourself for this 5 weeks, and then do it at all possible on a daily basis. Does that sound okay? Okay. Well, thanks for being a great congregation. Be sure to practice so you can report back to Pastor Emily, that I did a good job this week. Thanks.